and welcome everybody. And I'd like to introduce Aldo Rall. So Aldo has been a long-standing certified Discipline Agile coach, certified Discipline Agile instructor, lots of experience in other certifications, as you can see on the screen. And my tagline for Aldo is commitment to the DA community. So many of the guests that we've had previously have taken time and from a preparation standpoint and being here in person. But I would like to point out that for Aldo, who is in New Zealand, it is 4 a.m. in the morning for Aldo. So quite a commitment to be here to speak today. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share so we can actually just get into the video itself. And Aldo, if you can just start to introduce your topic and we'll get on with it.
Thank you, Joshua. When we discussed me coming up here, the first thing that came to mind is guided continuous improvement. And I'm really happy that I get to have the opportunity to talk about this subject. I'm really passionate about it, and I've had a lot of success by some of the pointers or some of the ideas that we're going to be discussing today.
Yes, so from a guided continuous process improvement, and I have to say Aldo, before we even get started, we have our first question, and I'm going to go ahead and take it early because it's a great lead-in for the topic. So Robert asks, I've been through the DA-LSM training, and there were slides on guided continuous improvement. It had information on if you have a coach or not, and then using DA. I'm not sure I agree with what was covered. Can you give your opinion, Josh, and then Aldo? Wow, yeah, that's why I think it's a great lead-in. So Robert is talking about our Discipline Agile Lean Scrum Master training workshops, and there is some content in there that speaks to the body of knowledge of DA being all about guided continuous improvement. I mean, that's a huge part of what DA brings. And what I would say, Robert, is the slide that he's talking about, I think in particular, is we have something called a Kaizen loop, and it's where teams can identify candidate improvements from a process perspective. Maybe they're struggling with something, maybe they've gotten some experience with a particular practice, and now they want to try something else that might get them more efficiency or be more aligned with other teams that they have to interact with in their organization or within their value stream. And there is something that talks about, if you don't have somebody who's experienced, what do you do? And there's a bit of context that says, if you have a coach that's got experience with different practices and techniques, again, somebody who's kind of been there and able to help the team identify what they might do next, that's great. But coaches come at a cost, and oftentimes they're spread a little thin if companies have brought them in, especially from an external perspective. And the next part it covers is guided continuous improvement by taking a look at the body of knowledge of DA, right? Where we go in and we can take a look at the process goals and practices, take a look at trade-offs, where they might work, where they might not. And so now that I've got the lead into that, I will say absolutely you can use DA in that approach. I mean, that is what teams do. I've worked with many, many teams across lots of different organizations that have embraced being able to take a look at the hundreds of practices that you can go out and find from an agile perspective and figure out where you might want to use it, if it might be in conflict with something else that you're doing, are you ready to do it, and so forth. But I will say that in my opinion that I will tweak a little bit, and I do this oftentimes in the classes I deliver, that you are going to be in the best position if you have a coach. I mean, if you have a coach that's got really good experience, you just can't supplement that to the same level with written guidance. It's something that the way that we teach that is intended to show that in the absence of having that experience, you do have something you can go to. So Robert, from my perspective, I hope that's clear. And Aldo, if you want to chime in as well.
Yeah, the guided part in guided continuous improvement actually implied the three things, and Joshua's touched on two of them. You need somebody that can Sherpa you or coach you or stand beside you or be able to stand back and view this whole complex adaptive system that's happening and how change is affecting it. That's the first thing you need. The second thing that guided implies is you need a playbook, a toolkit let me say, if you're going to go on a journey, you need a map. So the toolkit in DA provides you with a really detailed map of what are the different ways or what are the different routes that you can take. And the last thing that you need to think about in the word guided is that it's about experiments. And it helps you to focus to learn about the territory. So you have your map, you've got your Sherpa or your coach, but you still don't know how the territory looks like. And the only way that that makes it worth your while is through running small experiments or small and focused experiments and using that as a learning to understand the actual territory. Survivable experiments. Yeah, exactly. We talk about small experiments. Um, so
Yeah.
that's the three things that the word guided implies. Cool.
And Paul, to Paul Sims's point here, survivable experiments. One of the things I'll pile on top of that is we limit the amount of risk when we're doing experimenting by time boxing. Often, if we're using the agile life cycle, right, in another, a coming iteration, we might select something to do differently. And if it doesn't work, we're not going to spend months figuring that out. We're going to see in a very short period of time that maybe we're going to abandon that, go back to what we were doing, or select something else from our available options.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope that answers the question.
Next question. Well, we've got a lot of questions coming in early today, which is great. Sutil asks, how can we make improvements if we don't have a guide, aka an experienced coach?
Okay. Well, there's no sight like hindsight, like they tell you, and that's why you want to do work with small and incremental experiments. You've got the toolkit in DA that gives you like I said, that gives you the map, but then you're going to have to make intentional decisions about trying A or B or C until you find something that works for you. Or if some of the options in there doesn't particularly fit you, is what can you do in terms of tweaking it for your context? Remember that principle in DA that context counts or context matters. This is really where it comes into play, is to actually understand your context and then tweaking some of the choices or the options from DA to suit your context. It's not about changing your context to suit whatever is set in the framework or the tick box. It's the other way around. I hope that that helps.
Yeah.
You
Something else I'll add on to that, especially if you don't have an experienced coach, is also be very cognizant of how much experimentation you're going to do, right? Because you don't want to have so many things you're experimenting with in your next little time period. Again, if you're going to try a number of new things in the next iteration, you need to for one you need to be sure that something you're trying and an improvement you're seeing you're going to be able to identify. Or if you didn't make an improvement, was it because you tried so many different types of new practices? So again, an experienced coach is typically going to be able to kind of counsel a team a little bit on what they might select to do next, or let's try this and then let's go maybe an iteration or two and then try the next thing. Or if we're already using something like a lean life cycle where we're not using a time box construct, we can try something for a period of time, see how well it's going, and then do something else. And the last thing I like to add on to that, and Aldo, this was something I heard you say in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, which was change fatigue, right? We also want to make sure we're not just always looking for a certain amount of change to make improvements, and we're just constantly, thrashing about with a lot of change where it becomes very tiring to the team or tiring also outside of the team. So that's just something else if you don't have an experienced coach, yeah, to be mindful about.
just jumping on that as well is not just if you've got a reason for the change. So if you're clear about why you want to change this or that, and you're clear about the reason for that, that's going to help you through that change fatigue, because it's going to keep you focusing on that North Star about why you actually need this change or why do you want to change. So don't ever underestimate that little word why, the reasons for change. If you're clear about that, then the change is a lot easier, and it will then help you to focus your experiments and frame it in a way that builds towards that reason or takes you away from that reason.
Yeah. So Paul Sims also added in a little bit more content to the survivable experiments comment. And Paul is saying we might need to add some context for those people who have never seen a discipline agile goal diagram with decision points and options. So yeah, I'll try and provide a contextual visualization of what that is. So we've got in discipline agile sort of containers of information, and one of the containers are called process goals. At the team level, there are currently 21 of those, and within them, they're organized around things like form team, develop common vision, coordinate activities. So there are ways you can find information for particular types of activities or things that you're going to need to do. Within that, we have a number of decision points, and each decision point is just something the team can take a look at for considering, and there's lots of options. So this is where the hundreds and hundreds of agile practices that are sort of out in the industry, which is become quite chaotic these days, are organized very well in the way that they're positioned, so that you can, as a team or team member, you can quickly take a look at information, get a brief description of what that thing is, see some trade-offs around what you may or may not want to take into consideration in making a decision on what you might do next.
Cool. I see there's a question from one of the people, Theophana, sorry if I got it wrong, apologies. One of the best tools available for change is ATCAR. Does anyone have experience using ATCAR on an agile transformation? So I'm going to jump right in there if you're okay with that, Josh.
Absolutely.
So one thing that I've learned working with DA is that there's always choice. And ATCAR is one of the models that you can choose from. But from an agile, in an agile context, some of the models like ATCAR comes across as linear. So if you go read Lean Change Management by Jason Little, he shows you how to actually use some of the steps in ATCAR, but in an iterative and incremental way, running small experiments and so on. Personally, I like to borrow from all of these different models and come up with something that's just suitable for this specific context. So I use last one I've used DA obviously, but I've used a combination of the switch model, so Chip and Dan Heath's model. I've used elements of that. There's one or two things I've borrowed from ATCAR and combined that into my own interpretation of the lean change management practices that Jason Little talks about. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. And another question we have, Gutera asks, I'm on a Scrum team and we have been a good team for some time now. What would you recommend we look at in Discipline Agile as things to consider? Aldo, I'll say you, if you want to go first, and I've got a few things that I immediately want to answer with.
Yeah. I'm going to throw the cat among the pigeons here and ask, why did you select that specific, or why did your organization select that specific approach? And I think that's probably where I would go start, is ask why did you choose to adopt Agile and why did you choose Scrum? If you're able to answer those things without hesitating, then I think you're off to a good start. But sometimes you need to go back and actually stand back and ask, why did we choose Agile? What was the reasons? I see many organizations just going Agile for the sake of going Agile. So change for the sake of change and not change in order to move towards a specific set of objectives or a vision or or reasons. Again, coming back to the reasons. The second thing is you may need to go and use DA to look at those decisions. Oh, there's a decision tree in DA that helps you pick the right life cycle. And the life cycle that you're on may not be 100% suitable for your context. So I go evaluate whether we did choose the right life cycle and pattern of approach. And then when you go through the 21
Process goals.
Process goals in DA, it's really easy to get overwhelmed. So what I would do is I would pick one and go and have a conversation with the organization or the team and say, what are we actually doing in this area, in this process goal area? And then pick something, or actually say, oh, we're definitely using this. And then perhaps the conversation is this the best we can do? Is there a way that we can perhaps try another technique as a small experiment? So from what I've seen is this big change rarely works. So the only way is if you keep building on small incremental experiments. That builds a compound interest over time, and it accelerates the team's change adoption. If you're going to bring in a big change, if you look at the Virginia SATA curve, you want small incremental continuous changes instead of one big change. So I'd focus the team on, or the organization on, building that compound interest through small incremental changes. Oops. Sorry.
Yeah, and so I'll just add a slightly different sort of train of thought on that as well. So one of the things that I get an opportunity to do quite a bit is these, agility health checks, going in, doing assessments, and taking a look at, how well teams are doing at given organizations. And so, oftentimes it's teams that are using Scrum or a Scrum-like approach, right? They might have started with Scrum, and whether they were really on a good path or not, irregardless. So if I've got a team and they've been doing Scrum for a while, and yes, they're following kind of what Scrum has in the Scrum guide, and they're delivering value on a pretty consistent and pretty good basis. What I'll take a look at is, are they ready for some of the other things that Disciplinary Agile has to offer? Could they be in a position where we could look to move to the lean life cycle, right? They have enough discipline, they have enough rigor with their way, just their way of working, that we could say, let's move to abandon using something like a sprint and having more of a continuous flow, right? Is that something that they would be ready to do and benefit from? So there are some things that I think teams that are delivering good value using Scrum, or again, a Scrum-like approach, can look to DA even at the higher level. I'd say the life cycle choice is one of the sort of highest level decisions you can make, and give it a try. Right now, sometimes we have teams that I've worked with that are using Scrum that say we've been doing it a long time and it's really great. And you get in and they're not really taking a very agile way of working, right? It's Scrum fall, or agile fall, or Scrum butt, right? All the other things that we've seen coined in the industry. So sometimes they'll say, we'll start with the agile life cycle, which just extends Scrum's approach. And if you are doing a good job with delivering value using that, we can then transition to one of the other life cycles. So, Aldo, one of the things that you mentioned as far as you used the word big a few moments ago, and I'll ask you what you think about the big bang approach and how that can either support or be a detriment to continuous improvement.
So if you look at the change curve as described by Virginia SATA, that curve, as it curves downwards, if it is too big, it's going to take an immense amount of energy and effort to dig yourself out of that hole. as opposed to small incremental changes that's digestible. There's a massive impact on people's psyche, um, and there's a lot of psychological reasons that you have to contend with if you actually go with the big bang. Um, there's a book written by a doctor, a medical doctor called the Kaizen Way, where he actually talks about micro habits, and he's got a lot of compelling evidence and arguments for small incremental continuous changes instead of a big bang change. The other part when it comes to big change, it means big timelines. So the assumptions that you initially make when you initiate a change process in an organization may never, you may never get any feedback on it because it takes years before you actually are in a supposed better state. So that feedback loop is really important so that you can course correct along the way. If you have a big upfront rollout plan that's going to span into the next 4 or 3 years or whatever the case might be, it's going to be very difficult to know that whether you are actually aiming in the right direction. You're going to need some mechanisms in order to course correct as you go. So I hope that answers the question.
Yep. And we've got one more that Britta asked. She says, my company has an Agile CoE, and the way we do improvements is the CoE selects a new thing for us to try, and all teams have to then do it. What are your thoughts? Oh,
Wow. Okay.
wow.
Um,
Well, first, let me say,
that's
Britta, sorry.
Yeah, yes. Okay, good one, Josh. So that sounds like very much command and control approach to it. So um, I hope they actually do speak to you guys about ideas and let you guys, as in the teams, choose what it is that you actually would like to try. Um, so uh, I see a lot of um, coaches out there that forget that it's about the team's journey. It's the organization's journey, and it's not their own. So we have to keep, as coaches, we have to keep respecting what the team's journey, because it's their own unique journey. It's their own context. So for me, that's quite important. So I never prejudge a team based on where they are. Um, I meet them like that Sherpa. I meet them where they are, and I walk their journey with them. So that's pretty important for me. So I'll leave that there.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add on to that one is outside of a few things that would be consistent, maybe for most, if not all, teams, which would be something like smaller batch size or having a way to be completely transparent with what's going on, right? Using something like a Kanban board. Outside of a handful of things, having a practice or something that is going to be applicable to every single team rarely, I think, would potentially work, because each team is different. The context of what they're doing is different. Their state or how much experience they've got along their journey is going to be different. And when I've seen things like this that are occurring, a lot of times it's based off of maybe a very high performing team that is making a lot of progress. And it's like, because the A team is doing it, we want all teams to now do this practice or that practice, which can be very detrimental to teams that are not maybe staffed the exact same way. Maybe they don't have the same level of experience. Maybe they don't have the exact same domain knowledge. Maybe they've got a lot more complexity in all of the types of tactical scaling factors we would look at. And that can really cause a lot of challenge let alone a lot of decreased progress. So yeah, Britta, one of the things you might want to do is go to the DA website, get the Choose Your Wild book, get access to one of the many forms of this body of knowledge, and be able to then share with your COE succinct information that provides some of these trade-off decisions and so forth to start raising their awareness. So I hope that answers your question. I hope you can go back to your organization and maybe have a little bit of a counterpoint. So we are getting pretty close on time, Aldo. So what I'd like to do is just give you a minute or two to give any parting thoughts that you'd like to share with those in attendance today, as well as those that might watch this recording in the future.
So I would just want to reiterate: is get a guide. Remember the Sherpa, the map, and the territory, the experiments with the territory. There's a lot of good content out there to actually go and evaluate and borrow from. And then one last thing is that one question I always ask is, if you want to change, who owns the change? That's really important, is because if you as the coach or the Scrum Master introduces the change, who owns it? I think it's really important to be clear about that. I've seen many change introduced into teams and organization, and the Scrum Master or the coach or the manager ends up owning it. The team isn't emotionally committed to that change. So be very careful when you do introduce changes. Be clear about who owns it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Aldo. And Aldo, thanks again, not only for coming to share your thoughts on guided continuous improvement, but at such an early hour. I know that being on this Zoom chat prior to 4 a.m. to go through our prep was again quite the commitment. And
the coffee worked. Thank you.
The coffee worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, much appreciated. So I'm going to go ahead and do one last just quick share of my screen. Yeah, so if you'd like additional information, please see us processmentors.com, and we will have our next panelist on August 12th next week, Dr. Gail Ferreira, and she's going to be talking about how she's bringing Discipline Agile into the university system. So it's something that is quite interesting, and really happy to see that this is something that's finally starting to happen, where we're going to have Discipline Agile that is in the educational system. So thank you again, Aldo. Thank you again for everybody that's in attendance. We hope to see you next week. And Aldo will be rejoining us at the end of the month for our series called Ask Me Anything DA, where the attendees get to drive what we talk about via the questions that they're asking. So yes, thanks again, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.